Given all of the money and time in the world, could you make a steam locomotive full size do a loop-de-loop like it's a roller coaster? Well, what's up guys, this is Hyce, and today we're gonna try and see if that's even remotely physically possible from a mechanical engineering sense. Now, as always, if you're scared of math, things are gonna be time-stamped so you can go to the appropriate discussion sections down below. Okay, so I think it's a pretty simple thing to start with. We're talking about a steam train. We wanna pick a fast steam train, and well, we had this whole video about what is truly the fastest or was the fastest, but at the end of the day, the record is truly held by the Mallard. So Mallard, 126 miles an hour. So we're gonna answer the question, can the Mallard do a loop if it runs? Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we're gonna need to apply some basic principles of physics and mathematics to determine if the top speed that Mallard's capable of entering a loop would be fast enough that it doesn't fall off the top of the loop. Roller coaster trains have extra wheels that hold them onto the tracks. We're trying to think, can we spike a conventional railroad track up around a clothoid loop? Will it work? We're gonna make a couple assumptions on the way, but the math is relatively simple. So here we have everyone's favorite Microsoft Paint, and this is going to be our tool of the trade today. So we're going to go, and we're going to send the Mallard into a loop. Okay, let's get a little approximation. It's a 462. This is way out of scale. It's fine. It's blue and it's kind of swoopy shaped, and it's got a little hump for the cab. Something like that. There you go. An American's approximation of Mallard. I'm sorry. Okay, we know that the Mallard can do 126 miles an hour. So it's gonna be going 126 miles an hour. The next thing to find out is how tight of a loop do we need to run it through? Now, a normal loop that a roller coaster runs through is what's called a clothoid loop, where the radius of the loop changes the whole time so that you don't get killed by the G-forces. See the first roller coasters ever that had a perfectly circular loop. Because I'm an engineer, I'm gonna make a couple assumptions, even ones that maybe physicists would make. The assumptions that we're gonna make is that we're going to treat the equation as a circular loop, knowing that it would technically be a clothoid loop. It's not going to change too much in terms of things, because ultimately what we're worried about is, will the choo-choo fall off when it's at the very top of the loop, which is basically circular in construction at that point anyways, and it's where the speed's going to be the lowest. So we're going to calculate that acceleration and make sure that the train is still trying to accelerate into the track. Because if you're accelerating away from the track, you fall off, and then, yeah. Also, there's all the thought about what would happen to the boiler and the fire and the water. So when the choo-choo gets up into the top of the loop, we know that we're gonna make it a box, because I don't want to draw the Mallard improperly like several times over, and get all of Britain extremely angry at me, which they're usually angry at me anyways because I exist and I'm American, but whatever. We know that the locomotive's gonna have some weight, and we know that it's going to have an acceleration that we hope will cancel out that weight, right? So if we do our Newton's laws, we need the sum of forces to be zero, because technically a zero acceleration means that it would be floating right there against the track. Anything that would be an acceleration this way would be falling away. Anything above zero would be that. So it would be our bare minimum case. And that we can figure out what that loop size might be. So the weight of the locomotive is down, our acceleration is up. So what is our weight of the locomotive? According to a quick Google search, Mallard weighs 115.3 imperial tons, or short tons. And we're gonna be doing things in imperial measurements because I'm a mechanical engineer from the USA. I know this is gonna scare half the world and all of the physicists, but you'll get over it. So we know our weight is 115.3 imperial tons. So we can multiply that by 2,000 pounds to get our weight in pounds. And then when we multiply that by 32.2 feet per second, that gives us our mass times gravity term pointing down. And for the sake of easy rounding, that's basically 7.425 million, units. It's fine, right? Okay, so that's what this force can equal. Now, when you have a centripetal acceleration, something that's moving through a circle, and remember, we're assuming at this point that at the very top of the loop, it's going to be a circular thing. It's going to experience perfectly circular acceleration. Not technically the truth, but I'll let the roller coaster nerds argue about that in the comments while the train nerds get into the train details after this. The acceleration is defined as v squared over r. Okay, so that's the velocity of the train squared divided by the radius of the circle it's going around. That'll give us an acceleration. We multiply again by the mass that we have. That's there. I could have just canceled out the oh. It's been a long time since I've done physics problems, actually. College was a while ago. Simplification. You could just get rid of the mass. It doesn't matter. Single tier. And then we wouldn't even have to get into the conversation about slugs and, oh shit, that's already weight.
I'm pausing right now because I feel a little dumb. That's why. It'll pass.
Okay, we're gonna own our mistakes and say that we're stupid. It's happening. Yeah, so we'll keep that bit, but this whole thing, yeah, tons already have the 32.2 in there. That's that whole mass versus weight thing, and I was like, oh yeah, tons, yeah. Mass is kilograms, but that's the same in pounds, right? No, because pounds is already a force. It's already got the weight, and it's a thing, versus kilograms being mass. Maybe I should concede that yes, metric is better. I have several times. They're better for certain things, but well, we'll let the unit people go argue in the comments as well. Okay, so now we know that we have 230,600 pounds. Okay, and that is a force, right? Because it's a weight, and we need that. We'll actually make it pound force to remember it easier, and we need that to be equal to the force going the other direction to zero things out to figure out how big of a loop we need. And then we can determine based on the locomotive's geometry if it could complete the loop while staying on the tracks, and that's where the train piece comes into this, okay? So that's gonna equal the mass times the velocity squared divided by the radius. So we're gonna solve for the radius. I'm gonna save you the algebra because I don't wanna do it on camera because I've already proved that I can't do this on camera because it's been too long since Physics 1. Suffer with me, everybody. Okay, having solved for the radius of the loop, we get the mass, which is just the weight that we calculated, but in slugs or pound mass, which is stupid. I forgot how much I hate imperial units in physics. I retract my earlier statements. We have that mass term times the velocity, which is 184.8 feet per second, which is the same as 126 miles an hour. And then we divide by the actual weight force that the locomotive experiences. We're assuming light locomotive and all that. And that'll give us the minimum radius that we'll run into for a possibility there. And this is also hand waving some other things, and we'll see if it's even vaguely possible here. Okay, plugging that into a calculator, the minimum radius of the loop is 1,060 feet and a half. I don't know what the half gets you, but that's pretty significant at that speed, 1,060 feet. Well, I guess the train's pretty heavy, right? So this might be more possible than I was imagining it was gonna be. Other than the ridiculous civil engineering concerns, I'm sure that they could find a way with lots of concrete and it'll be fine. You know, I would have thought it would have been really easy to Google all the information I would need about the Mallard to complete this, and I'm having a heck of a time trying to find some of the information, so we're gonna have to make a couple assumptions. What else is new, ladies and gentlemen? I was specifically looking for wheelbase information on the locomotive. You can see it's a 462 Pacific and that my drawing was absolutely flawless, clearly, of trying to get it right. But we need to know the wheelbase of the locomotive to know where it might actually pivot or be able to have travel in space. Because we've got a radius minimum of 1,060 feet in a vertical curve. And we need to know, are the wheels all going to stay on the track? And so the big concern here is going to be the positioning between the drivers. Is that middle driver going to float? Well, based on typical bearing tolerances, especially trying to run that fast, we kind of know a little bit how far the wheels might be able to travel up and down within the frame. But will they have enough travel to allow the locomotive to actually go through this curve without crabbing over, binding up, seizing, and then flying off the loop and exploding in a flame of ridiculous British fried duckness? I don't know. That's what we're trying to find out. So I have the driver diameters. I have the overall length. We can size it using MS Paint. Thankfully, pictures are mostly to scale. And we'll just do that. All right, so just double checking my back of napkin math here. I measured the driver diameter of 80 inches in pixels in Paint, and then I found the centers of the two drivers and figured out that the wheelbase overall of the rigid wheelbase is about 185 inches, which means that each wheel is vaguely 92.5 inches apart, plus or minus the confidence of this itty-bitty image that I stole off of Google. It's fine. Okay, so 80 inch, okay, that means that there's like a foot between tires-ish. And there's 6'8". That looks like that's probably close enough for this ridiculous equation that we're doing, so that we know that we need to basically make sure that we're not gonna float that middle driver. Because if we start floating things when the running gear is going that fast, that's how you have some problems. Like if you were going slow, it would be one thing. I've seen locomotives loaded on and off of trailers having a wheel float for a brief second and the frame supports it. But when you're talking about yeeting the mallard up this thing doing 126 mile an hour, and we also haven't even determined the speed that it would actually be going at the top of the loop, because you would lose a lot of speed due to gravity. If this equation says no, then we know it's not possible. If not, we might have to downsize the size of our loop, and that's a significantly more complex problem. Ah, yes, physics. Everyone's favorite joy. This is like the world's worst yet best homework problem all at the same time. It was at this point, viewers, that I sat there and went, okay, well now I need to draw and figure out the distance between the middle driver and that part of the loop, depending on that radius and if it would be possible or not. And the more I sat there trying to think about drawing it in Paint and then starting to do the math to make it work, I realized that it'd be just a hell of a lot easier to visually see it if I just drew it in SolidWorks. So I did. Now, the hilarious thing, of course, is that SolidWorks is heinously unprepared for this disparate scope and nature, and it also made it really hilarious to see the difference in diameter. It turns out when you make a loop with the radius of, almost a quarter mile, it makes even the 80-inch drivers on the Mallard look really small. Yeah, maybe this was not the part of the equation that I should be worried about. I thought it would have to be a much tighter loop, but turns out trains are heavy. Right, details. Okay, and so if we get distance here, this is in inches. It's 12,679.66 inches from the center of the loop to the center of that wheel, which means we can figure out the difference, which I don't think is gonna matter. Oh. This is a hilarious problem of scale, so much so that it really can't show it. And I want to double check my math on camera here, because I got that the center would be 46 inches from the edge of the loop, which means that you'd have 6 inches of gap between the tire and the rail, which is otherwise known as a problem. But let me double check, because we said it was 1,060.5 feet times 12 is the radius. Okay, and then SolidWorks dimensioning to that center point is gonna be, 12,679.66. Wow. Did I do that right? Is that the same number? I have let me double check that one more time, because the drawing does not look very helpful in that regard. So we have 2544 is our rate, is the diameter, right? Because SolidWorks wanted the diameter, which is 1,272 inches, which is 10,060 feet Ah, see? Don't ever let me input something into a thing and do it right the first time. 10,060.5 times 2 times 12. So it should be 2542. 25,542. Little bit bigger, because that extra half a foot. We have 25,542, and then we can subtract, or we need to divide that by 2 to get our radius. Then we subtract the 1270, 30, 41 inch. Okay. Oh, interesting. All right, now that we've solved for that extra half foot that we had there, we've now determined that it would want to pick that middle driver an inch off the rail. And now the question is, could the Mallard, maintained at the ability of going 127 miles an hour, actually do that? Now, the interesting rub mechanically with a steam locomotive is, okay, if we need to drop down the middle wheel set an inch relative to its friends, can it do that? And locomotives, obviously, as you can see, have connecting rods that connect the wheels together. The engine itself attaches in on one drive set, and then it uses those connecting rods to transfer the power to all the other wheels in the locomotive. And as such, that means that those rods are going to act like little suspension bridges trying to hold things together, and that may or may not work depending on how the engine's set up. Now, taking a look at Mallard, it's a 462 Pacific, so our engine's connecting in on the number 2 driver, and that's the one that's going to be floating, which means that our primary source of power is now in the air by up to an inch unless it has an inch of play. The challenge with dropping this driver down an inch is that it wants to bring the other 2 drivers closer to it, which, if the running gear is really tight, it's not going to do. If the running gear is really loose, it might. I work on what we jokingly call a clog iron, slobber bucket, narrow gauge, garbage, ancient, ruined, designed for crappy tolerance narrow gauge power over here in the United States. And I wouldn't be surprised if we could get some of that transition, and heck, I've seen some of it coming on and off turntables. But my connecting rods between drivers are only yay long, because I've got 44-inch drivers on the biggest engine. These are 6'8". They're taller than my friend Brett, who's one of the tallest humans I'm aware of. So, I don't think that the problem's going to be exactly the same. As well, our locomotive's going to do 40 mile an hour. This thing did 126. And if you're running an engine that fast, that many RPM, you need to have it in pretty tip-top shape and have everything pretty tight. The typical guidance that I hear in the States is for the fitting for a bushing in a rod on the crank pin is something like a 32nd of an inch. That's all the clearance you get, considering no other articulation in the rods. Some rods have extra articulation points called a knuckle joint, but it doesn't look like Mallard has those. So if you've got a 32nd of play and you go 32nd up on those guys and a 32nd down on that guy, congrats, you've gotten a 16th of an inch down to that railhead. But it seems to me that Mallard would be floating a little bit. And if you're picking that up, the odds of overheating a bearing, or the odds of binding something up, or the odds of not setting back down on the track, even in that tightest scenario, that's the smallest loop, a perfectly circular loop, that even if it could get to 127 at the top that it could possibly do, I don't think it could do it. You know, maybe there's another locomotive out there that has a better balance of things. Maybe there's a super fast engine that's got a much longer wheelbase that has nothing in the middle. Or maybe perhaps a Garrett. But that adds extra considerations into it. Perhaps a locomotive like a Garrett might be the answer here. Let's take a quick peek for the uninitiated. We haven't talked about them on the channel because they're very, very outside of my wheelhouse of knowledge, but a Garrett-type locomotive slings the boiler in between the 2 engines. And if you got a small enough engine on a Garrett that could run fast enough, maybe you could span that issue with having something floating in the middle. This engine being a Pacific probably wouldn't be the thing, and it probably wouldn't do the right speed, and but that would be the concept for something that just maybe could do it. But I think at this point I'm going to say that no, you could not build the right size loop, even if you had all the civil engineering in the world, the best civil engineers, and all the concrete and money and time and everything. I don't think you could build a vertical loop that a steam locomotive full size could actually run around. At least with the tech and the locomotives that we know about. This is a very fun, silly idea, and I knew that I wanted to do it. As soon as my sister bugged me about it, it was like, oh, well, that's just a fun concept. Like, could it? I don't know. 127 mile an hour is pretty fast, especially when you consider all the momentum behind it. Would it work? I don't know. Maybe it would screech around and you'd get there and it would hold itself there. Maybe you could build a tighter loop that made the gap bigger, but it would increase the acceleration, so the likelihood of the locomotive falling off would be less. But floating driver, and we didn't even get into thinking, okay, we've made the middle driver float. Now what about the lead truck and the trailing truck? Do they have enough lifts to be even further out? I doubt it. They don't have that much movement because they're designed for speed. I don't think it's possible. So, what a fun idea. I hope you guys enjoyed this. It's definitely a descent into madness of nerddom. So, you know, it was a time. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for watching. We'll catch y'all next time.